Hi there, everyone, and welcome to the Daily Gardener, and thank you for listening. I'm your host, Jennifer Ebling. It's July 27th. Today we remember the first woman to have circumnavigated the world, and we'll also learn about the wealthy horticulturist who built a magnificent estate on the shores of Lake Waban. We celebrate the botanist who was the first editor of the journal called Rhodora, a publication of the New England Botanical Club. We'll also salute the father of British plant geography. And today we honor the Reverend, who wrote 2 sweet little books for the Burpee Seed Company, and they were all about sweet peas. In today's Unearthed Words, we feature some silly, lighthearted poems about the garden, and we grow that garden library with a book that gives us something to do in terms of projects for our garden. And then we'll wrap things up with the story of the woman who founded the Greening of Harlem. But first, let's catch up on some greetings from gardeners from around the world and today's curated news. Well, first up is a picture from Alice M. that arrived in my email this morning. The picture is of her garlic harvest, and Alice wrote, "I've been growing garlic for 3 years, and it's so easy, I'm surprised I didn't grow it sooner." Well, Alice's garlic is hanging in her garage. And of course, once the heads begin to get papery, then you're good to go to start processing them. You know, garlic really is a wonderful crop to grow. And I remember when I interviewed the author of The Foodscape Revolution, Brie Arthur, because her tip for growing garlic was to grow it along the edges of your garden. And I thought this was a fabulous way to maximize the precious real estate that we all have with our gardens. Garlic is really unobtrusive. And why not make use of that little space up against the edge in the front and grow some garlic? Loved that idea. And then listener Linda C. wrote in to ask how difficult it is to overwinter coleus. Well, there's good news here, Linda, because it's extremely easy. All you need to do is take some cuttings of your coleus plant. You can put them in water to root them and then plant them in pots. I like to keep mine in front of a sunny window. And then all through the year, I basically treat them like one of my houseplants. Now, if you don't want to start all over with new cuttings, all you have to do is bring in your current coleus. Now, you might want to cut it back a bit because by the end of the season, it's really going gangbusters. So if you decide to bring the entire pot indoors, just make it a more manageable size by pruning it. Now, this may cause your coleus to go into a little bit of a shock, but in a few days, it'll be right as rain, and you will have saved yourself the trouble of buying more coleus in the spring. All right, that's it for today's Gardener Greetings. Now, if you'd like to participate in the Gardener Greetings segment, just send your garden pictures, stories, birthday wishes, and so forth to me, Jennifer, at thedailygardener.org. That's Jennifer at thedailygardener.org. In addition, you can share all of your well wishes and your garden pictures and stories in the Facebook group for the show, the Daily Gardener Community. And if you want to listen to the show while you're at home, just ask Alexa or Google to play the latest episode of the Daily Gardener podcast, and she will. It's just that easy. Here's today's curated news. Well, within the last month, the PBS NewsHour shared a wonderful interview that they did with landscape designer Piet Oudolf on finding solace in a garden. Here's an excerpt. The world has looked strange these past months. Familiar places no longer familiar at all. Many people have turned to their own or community gardens during this period, growing vegetables and flowers, nourishing body and soul. Gardening centers have been among the first essential businesses to reopen, and sales of seeds have soared. And regarding being in the garden, Piet said, "I think every day is an experience because there's always something you will like. And it's not only about the plants, it's also about the light and the movement. Once you touch the plants and just start to work with them, there's a big chance that you get lost in the world of plants and that you want to experience more of gardening. You can think while you're gardening. You can think about life and how to follow up after this crisis. But at least people want to go to places where I normally would go, to parks and to gardens. And I think that people will realize that we as human beings need that to feel good." And what I say to people that just start gardening, I think anything that you see at the garden center that you like can be a good start to become a serious gardener. Well, there is a ton more in this wonderful post from PBS NewsHour. And if you'd like to read this lovely post for yourself in detail, just search for the word PBS in the Facebook group for the show, and this post will pop up. All right, that's it for today's gardening news. Now, if you'd like to check out any of my curated news articles or original blog posts for yourself, you're in luck because I share all of it with the listener community in the free Facebook group for the show, the Daily Gardener Community. So there's no need to take notes or search for links. The next time you're on Facebook, just search for Daily Gardener Community and request to join. I'd love to meet you in the group. Here's today's brevities. Today is the birthday of the explorer and botanist Jeanne Baret, who was born on this day in 1740. Jeanne was the first woman to have circumnavigated the world as part of the expedition, which was led by Louis Antoine de Bougainville. Now, you might be wondering how Jeanne was able to join the expedition, and that's a great question. She actually had to pose as a man, as the valet to the expedition's naturalist, Philibert Commerson. Before the expedition, Jeanne had been employed as Philibert's housekeeper. And a few years later, after his wife died, Jeanne took over management of his household, in addition to having a relationship with him. Now, Philibert had poor health, and it was likely that he needed Jeanne to join him on the expedition because he needed her assistance. Luckily, Jeanne herself was a botanist in her own right, and when the ship stopped in Rio de Janeiro, an old leg injury prevented Philibert from collecting specimens. And so it was Jeanne who ventured out into the tropics and returned with the lovely tropical vine that would be named to honor the expedition's commander, Bougainville. And today is the birthday of one of America's most prominent horticulturists, Horatio Hollis Hunnewell, who was born on this day in 1810. Horatio was staggeringly wealthy. He was a railroad financier, but he also had a lifelong love of nature and gardening, and he loved to spend his money on landscaping and plants. When Horatio purchased over 40 acres of land along the eastern and southern shores of Lake Waban, he built a magnificent estate there. He had just married Isabella Pratt Wells, and he decided to call his impressive home Wellesley in honor of his wife's maiden name of Wells. When it came time for the nearby town and college to settle on a name, they also selected the name Wellesley after conferencing with Horatio, who happened to be the most generous benefactor in the city. The Hunnewell estate was so large that when the Hunnewell children grew up, 7 of 9 of them had homes built right on the property next to their parents' original house. And aside from the impressive homes, Horatio added many magnificent features to the estate, including a pinetum with over 325 specimens of conifers. And in 1899, Horatio made a remark in reference to his trees, and it's one of my favorites. He said, "No Vanderbilt, with all his great wealth, can possess one of these trees for the next 50 years, for it could not be grown in less time than that." And Horatio also installed the very first topiary garden in America at Wellesley. He referred to it as the Italian Garden, and it was ideally situated along the shores of Lake Waban. And it's no surprise that when it came to the topiary garden, Horatio went all out. Whenever he had guests, he would have them hop aboard a large, authentic Italian gondola boat, complete with an authentically dressed gondola man. After they would glide up to the topiary gardens, they would stop and take a tour. And it was said that Horatio's shores rivaled that of Lake Como in northern Italy. Today, it's difficult to fathom how much attention this one-of-a-kind garden received from the public. Thousands of visitors from all over the country came to Wellesley just to see the topiary garden firsthand, and many more took in its beauty through photographs and engravings that were published in the most popular periodicals of the time. And to this day, a century and a half later, the Hunnewell Topiary Garden is among the most spectacular sights in the region. Now, there are a few fun tidbits that I discovered as I was researching Horatio. The first is that he was friends with Nathaniel Thayer Jr., and the two of them are credited with bringing the game of tennis to America. The second fun fact is that Horatio was the first person to cultivate and popularize rhododendrons in the United States. And today is the anniversary of the death of the botanist Benjamin Lincoln Robinson, who died on this day in 1864. In 1892, Benjamin was appointed the curator of the Asa Gray Herbarium at Harvard. When Benjamin took over, both the herbarium and the library were in dire straits. Benjamin was instrumental in acquiring funds and extending the growth of the herbarium. And today, the Gray Herbarium and Library are still housed at Harvard at 22 Divinity Avenue. And in 1899, the first issue of the New England Botanical Club's journal, Rhodora, was published. And the Rhodora's first editor was Benjamin. And today is the anniversary of the death of the botanist and the father of British plant geography, Hewitt Cottrell Watson, who died on this day in 1881. In recognition of his significant contributions, the Botanical Society of the British Isles named their journal Watsonia. Beginning in 1834, Hewitt was one of the first botanists to research plant evolution, and his work also paved the way for a new science now known as ecology. When Darwin created his theory of evolution, he was standing on the shoulders of curious early evolutionists like Hewitt. Now, Darwin's popularity and success overshadowed folks like Hewitt who had come before him. Yet it's evident that when Hewitt read Darwin's Origin, his reaction was one of wonder, and also self-reflection. Hewitt had spent his adult life trying to reach Darwin's conclusion, and now, as an older man, he could see the match he had lit being passed to a true torchbringer. After reading The Origin, Hewitt wrote to Darwin, and his letter is part proud dad, part odd fan, and yet he still takes time to advise Darwin on areas to improve or take heed. In 2 different passages, Hewitt points out that Darwin had succeeded where he had stopped short, saying Darwin had figured out the quo modo, or the method to knit the strings of the theory of evolution together. Hewitt's letter to Darwin is really quite something to read, even after all this time. Here's an excerpt. November 21st, 1859. My dear sir, once I started to read The Origin, I could not rest until I had galloped through all of it. I shall now begin to reread it more deliberately. Meantime, I'm tempted to write you my first impressions. First, your leading idea will assuredly become recognized as an established truth in science. In other words, natural selection. It has the characteristics of all great natural truths, clarifying what was obscure, simplifying what was intricate, adding greatly to previous knowledge. You are the greatest revolutionist in natural history of this century, if not of all centuries. Second, you will perhaps need to limit or modify the principle of natural selection. Third, now that these novel views are brought before the scientific public, it seems truly remarkable how we didn't see them sooner. A quarter century ago, you and I must have had the same state of mind, but you were able to see and work out the theory, while I failed to grasp it. How greatly this will shock the ideas of many men. Very sincerely, Hewitt C. Watson. And it was on this day that a photo of the horticulturist and Reverend William T. Hutchins of Indian Orchard, Massachusetts, appeared in the Springfield Republican in 1895. William is remembered for his book called All About Sweet Peas. It was published in 1892 by the Burpee Seed Company. Incredibly, Burpee distributed 50,000 copies of All About Sweet Peas. Talk about a bestseller. 5 years later, William wrote another book through Burpee called Sweet Peas, Up to Date. William's writings were used as promo material for Burpee, and customers positively received them. In August of 1898, the Star-Gazette out of Elmira, New York, reported on a talk that William had given about the history and culture of the sweet pea. Here's an excerpt. Mr. Hutchins said that the flower is a native of Sicily and is widely cultivated there, but in late years it has come into popular favor in America and is now raised in nearly every part of the country. William mentioned some of the rare varieties and told how they are obtained, and he also gave a most interesting description of the gardens of Mr. Eckford in England and his cultivation of 75 of the choicest sweet peas have been given to the flower lovers of the world. In 1950, Charles H. Curtis, the editor of the Gardener's Chronicle, wrote, 50 years ago, a parson from Indian Orchard, Massachusetts, stood on the platform in the lecture hall of the Crystal Palace. He was the Reverend William T. Hutchins, an enthusiastic grower of sweet peas, who had a voice as sweet and persuasive as the fragrance of his subject. I can hear him now. One of my favorite articles featuring William was published in the Atlanta Constitution on March 31st, 1991. And the title of the article was, "Oh, Sweet Peas, Please Climb Above My Knees." And it was written by Laura Martin. Laura dug up this fantastic quote by William, who said that the sweet pea has a fragrance like the universal gospel. And regarding the sweet pea, Laura wrote, "Finding a plant with outstanding beauty and fragrance is a treat. Most roses, of course, offer this combination, but easier and far less demanding are old-fashioned sweet peas, which will trail and climb in your garden while emitting a delicious scent. The common name is sweet pea. The botanical name is Lathyrus odoratus. The Greek word lathyrus means pea or pulse, and the Latin word odoratus means fragrant. Today, Japanese varieties of sweet peas have the most abundant blooms, and some Australian varieties are frilly. Sweet peas are a long-lasting vase flower, which makes them popular with florists and brides. And in terms of floriography, or the language of flowers, sweet peas convey bliss and pleasure. They also mean saying goodbye after having a good time. It turns out nothing says thank you like sweet peas. Finally, of the sweet pea, John Keats once wrote, "Here are sweet peas, on tiptoe for a flight, with wings of gentle flush over delicate white, and taper fingers catching at all things, to bind them all about with tiny rings." In unearthed words, today is Take Your Houseplants for a Walk Day, July 27th. In honor of this silly, lighthearted day, I thought I'd share these fun nonsense poems. This first one's from Anonymous. One fine October morning in September last July, the sun lay thick upon the ground, and the snow shone in the sky. The flowers were singing gaily, the birds were full in bloom. So I went down to the cellar to clean the upstairs room. And the second one is a favorite of mine. It's from the American poet Burton Braley, and it was first shared in the Science newsletter on March 9th, 1929, and it's simply called Botany. There should be no monotony in studying your botany. It helps to train and spur the brain, unless you haven't got any. It teaches you, does botany, to know the plants and spotany, and learn just why they live or die, in case you plant or potany. You learn from reading botany of woolly plants and cottony that grow on earth, and what they're worth, and why some spots have not any. You sketch the plants in botany. You learn to chart and plotany. Like corn or oats, you jot down notes if you know how to jotany. Your time, if you'll allot any, will teach you how and what any old plant or tree can do or be, and that's the use of botany. It's time to grow that garden library with today's book, Rustic Garden Projects by Marianne Svard Hegvik. This book came out in February of 2019, and the subtitle is Step-by-Step Backyard Decor, from Trellises to Tree Swings, Stone Steps to Stained Glass. And I tell you what, if you're bored or looking for something to do in the garden, this book is a charming gift to have on hand. It's loaded with ideas and gorgeous pieces of art, and the projects will give you something to do and help you express yourself in the garden. Now, some of these projects are simple and quick, and others may take you a day or two to complete. Projects include willow baskets, conical votives, personalized walkways, raised flower beds, lion head fountains, and more. The author, Marianne, is an engineer based in Stockholm, and she's been puttering around in her garden for ages before she and her husband decided to compile a book of their beautiful and fun garden projects. And Marianne is the owner of a garden design company in Sweden. And that design flair shows up in all of her projects, which I think really distinguishes her work from so many other garden project books that I've looked at over the years. This book is 256 pages of ideas and projects for the garden, and they're all shared with today's gardener in mind. You can get a copy of Rustic Garden Projects by Marianne Svard Hegvik and support the show using the Amazon link in today's show notes for around $5. Finally, here's something sweet to revive the little botanic spark in your heart. On this day in 1949, the founder of the Greening of Haarlem Coalition, Bernadette Kozart, was born. Bernadette was a professional gardener and urban gardening advocate, and she founded the Greening of Haarlem Coalition in 1989. Bernadette's efforts transformed Haarlem, bringing flower gardens and green spaces to areas previously covered by concrete and neglect. And it was Bernadette Kozart who said, "Instead of taking children on field trips to see farms and gardens, why not bring nature into the community? I don't think it's fair that they should have to go outside the community to have that experience of seeing things grow." Thanks for listening to The Daily Gardener, and remember, for a happy, healthy life, garden every day. The Daily Gardener is produced in lovely Wyoming, Minnesota with the help of Paige Mance, Brooke Bierbaum, Kiana Rayleigh, Maddie Doyle, Natalie Decker, and Eric Begay. You can find The Daily Gardener on all your favorite social media. You can follow the show on Instagram, and listeners always have a standing invitation to join the free Facebook group for the show. Just search for Daily Gardener Community the next time you're on Facebook and request to join. All the stories and books that are featured on the show can be found over at thedailygardener.org, thedailygardener.org. And while you're there, be sure to sign up for my free Friday newsletter. Last but not least, you can share your own gardener greetings on the show by emailing me at jennifer@thedailygardener.org. I'm your host, Jennifer Ebling, and as always, have a great day in the garden, and we'll see you tomorrow.